Hello and welcome back to this series on Sahi Pro. Today the discussion is going to be about how Sahi Pro can be used to identify elements on the web application that you are testing. Now please understand, identifying elements on the application that we are testing is a very critical aspect in any automation script written by any automation tester in this world. Now there are different techniques used by automation testers in order to be able to identify elements on the application they are testing, and I am listing out few of the commonly used techniques. Out of these different techniques that are used, three techniques I feel is something which is commonly used. The first one is using Xpath, which completely depends upon the structure of HTML that we have on our web page. The second one is using CSS selectors. And the third is using attributes. Now, how does Sahi Pro help in identifying elements? And how is it that with the least amount of code that can be written, you can identify elements that too precisely? Now, let me give you an example. Here, as you can clearly see, I have our test application OpenCart open in front of me. Now, there are different elements on this web page. Clearly, one can notice there is a text box, there are buttons, there are links, and if you can notice, there are some featured products. Now there are different elements here. Now, for example, let us assume that I want to be able to identify this search text box. Now, if I were to just go in the traditional route and inspect our web page, and if I were to just go here and click on this element, then this is the tag, the input tag which we have in front of you, and probably I'll just increase the size a little bit. Now clearly you can see this input tag is within another div, right? And clearly there are many attributes within this input tag. Now there are different ways in which one can identify this. One way of identifying it would be to use Xpath. Now, if you go on the Xpath route, for example, let us assume this is an HTML tree structure that I have. Now, depending upon the structure, depending upon the parent-child relationship is how we traditionally write Xpath. But the problem with Xpath is, if in case the UI were to change, if in case the position of the element were to change, then relatively the structure in the tree also changes. For example, let us assume the position of these two products were to be interchanged. If it gets interchanged, unfortunately the Xpath that you used for the first product and the second product will not work. Also at the UI level, if in case some change is made in terms of the CSS, then probably the CSS selector also may fail. So now as an automation tester, we want to make our lives as easy as possible. So how is it that we are going to identify elements such that even if changes were made to the UI, our automation script is somehow not affected by this change and still is able to precisely locate the element? Well, how does Sahi Pro do it? Let me give you an example. Now coming back to the example of identifying this text box. See, as I told you, if Xpath is something that we decide to use, then if the position of this element were to change on this page, then obviously it will change the structure of the tree, which will obviously ensure that Xpath does not work. Another way, that is the CSS route, is also a little bit shaky, because if there is some changes in the UI, then there is a high possibility that the CSS selector one also will not work. Now at Sahi Pro, this is how we imagine this. Now please understand, if I were to go and inspect this particular element, then everybody can see one thing, that in this input tag there are different attributes. Now clearly you can see there is an attribute called as name equal to search, which I am just identifying. Now, irrespective of whether the position changes, the CSS associated with this changes, I highly doubt that this attribute name equal to search will ever change at a UI level. Yes, which means the least likelihood of change is with respect to the attribute and its value in this particular element. And Sahi Pro is smart enough to recognize this fact. And if using Sahi Pro, if I were to try to identify this element, you will notice automatically identification will happen based on the attribute and its value, which is that name equal to search. Now let me show you this in action. I'm just closing this. I'm reopening the Sahi controller, and in great depth I have explained to you in the previous video how you can go about setting this up. Anyways, if you notice this, you can see automatically it is identifying these different elements, and if I take it to the search box, automatically, if you notice, you can see underscore text box and look at the value through which it is able to identify it, which is search. And if you notice that name equal to search, that was the attribute. So it has automatically picked the attribute value. And hence, this script, irrespective of what changes happens in the UI, 99.9% of the times will still precisely locate the text box. I hope you're able to understand. So hence, the single most important point which you have to derive from this discussion is that Sahi Pro values attributes significantly in the process of identifying elements, purely because it feels that these attribute and its values have the least likelihood to change at a UI level when changes happen, and hence ensures that the script which was created will 100% work irrespective of whether changes happened or not. Now let me show you a beautiful concept in Sahi Pro called as Relational API. Now there are primarily 5 types of Relational APIs in Sahi Pro: near, rightOf, leftof, under and above. Now let me give you a practical demonstration of when you would be using these Relational APIs. Let's take the first example of using near. Now, I'm going back to my OpenCart application. Now, let us assume I want to write a selector which successfully goes on to identify this add to cart under iPhone. Now, this is my expectation. Now, how can I go ahead and do that? Now, if you notice, if I were to just use Sahi Pro and go to this add to cart, click on control and hover over it, automatically it has identified, hey, this is a span. Right? So using a span tag, it has now told add to cart, which is the text, and it has added one index 1. Because please understand, there are multiple add to carts here. The MacBook add to cart is the first one, right? So which is automatically at index 0, which means the second one is given an index 1, third one is given an index 2. Now the problem is, yes, I can identify this add to cart using index 1, because if I just go to Sahi Pro and click on highlight, you can see it will highlight that element for me. I'm just clicking on it once more so that you can see it has highlighted, which means we have identified it correctly. But again, the problem is, as I told you, the automation script that we write must somehow not be affected by any UI changes which happens, and should be UI change proof. I hope you will understand. Now, I'll just give you one example. Assume that this MacBook and iPhone got swapped. Their positions got swapped. Now, the problem is at the index 1, I do not have iPhone and it is my MacBook. So, clearly this script will fail. So, what do? Indexing is not the right approach, because if you use indexing, then if a change happens in the UI, you will be directly affected. Hence, the Relational API of Sahi Pro comes to be your savior at the right moment. Now, how does it help you? It's very simple. All you need to do is, you need to find an element with whose relation you can identify this add to cart. What I mean to say in simple words is, let us assume that this add to cart which I am trying to identify, you can see it is nearby this text called as iPhone. It is nearby iPhone. So how do I identify add to cart which is near iPhone? That's where you use this Relational API. So for example, all I'm going to do is, I will just go here, my cursor over iPhone. So automatically it has identified a link using the text iPhone. Now what I'm going to do is, I will go here and you can see this anchor, which is your Relational API shortcut. If you click on this, now nearby iPhone, I want to identify add to cart. So I will just take my cursor here, click on control and hover over it. So clearly you can see it has identified add to cart, which is near iPhone. Now if you want to see whether it works or not, I will just go here and click on highlight. If I click on highlight, you can see this is the script. And clearly if I execute it using this arrow mark here, it is able to identify add to cart. And to just show you here, we can make this as a parameterized function also, as I've shown you in the previous tutorials, where if I were to just remove iPhone like this and replace it with MacBook, and if I were to execute it, clearly one can notice it is correctly identifying MacBook. And those of you who are thinking, hey, instead of giving value like MacBook or iPhone, can I use regular expressions? Is that a possibility? 100% regular expressions is supported. So go ahead and write your regular expression within double quotes and it will work like magic. So this is one of the examples to show to you how this relational API can help you in Sahi Pro. And here we have used a concept called as near. But there are 4 more, which is right of, left of, above and under, and that is what I am going to demonstrate next. Now I am going to demonstrate to you certain use cases where the other relational APIs also can help you tremendously. Now let me directly dive into an example. Now for example, as you guys can see, I have a small dummy table created here for your reference, right? So what essentially I want to do as a test case scenario is, I want to be able to check whether this link called as delete, is it visible or not. Now you can clearly see next to user 1 delete is there, next to user 3 delete is there, but next to user 2 delete is not there. I hope you're able to understand. Now first let us try to write a test case, write a script to automate this, okay. So try to understand what I'm going to do here essentially is just very simple. This is my Sahi controller here. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to take my cursor and I'm going to hover it over delete. So if in case I were to press control and hover it over delete, it is able to identify that yes, this is the link called as delete. And if in case I were to highlight it, clearly you can notice it is able to highlight that delete, yes. But the problem here is that just by using this link delete, I will not be able to identify the right delete next to each user, user 1, user 2, user 3. So here naturally we must be using a relational API. So what I want to do is I want to identify delete next to user 1. So how will you do it? It's very simple. I'll just remove this existing code and now all I'm going to do is again first I will go and identify this user 1. So see, cell user 1, I've identified user 1. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and click on this anchor button, which helps us to use the relational API. Then I'm going to take my cursor, press control and hover it over delete. And the moment I do it, you can notice it is now telling, hey, listen, please find this link called as delete, which is near a cell called as user 1. And if in case I were to highlight it, obviously you are able to see that correctly it will be highlighting it. Delete has got highlighted. I hope you're able to understand. Now, so this is the code here. A highlight, what do you have to highlight? The link called as delete, which is near what? A cell called as user 1. I hope you're able to understand this code. However, the problem here is, if in case I were to go here and change this user 1 to user 2, because clearly you can see there is a user 2 here. Now please tell me, should this be working near user 2? Should it be working near user 2? Because does user 2 have delete? No. But if in case I were to execute this code, you can see it is highlighting the first delete. Because think about it. What did you say? Highlight. What to highlight? A link called as delete. Near what? User 2. Please tell me, this is user 2. Don't you think this delete is next to user 2? 100% it is near user 2. So the code is working as per expectation. But that is not the expectation of the test case. So this should fail. But it is clearly not failing. So what we can do is, just using the relational API near is not going to help us. That is why there are other options. Now don't you think that this delete is to the right of user 1? Similarly, if there was a delete here, it would be to the right of user 2, and the third delete is to the right of user 3. So to be more precise, instead of telling nearby, we can say to the right of, and clearly to the right of user 2 there is no delete. So please understand, I am just going to go here and change this underscore near to right of, which is another relational API. And let me just change this back to user 1 to show you, if I were to execute this, clearly it is able to highlight. Yes, to the right of user 1 there is delete, but if I were to go and replace 1 with 2 here, and if in case I were to execute it, the moment I do it, there is an error. Why is there an error? Because this script has failed. Why did the script fail? Because to the right of user 2, my dear friends, there is no delete, and obviously in the back end your test case is going to fail. Now, some of you must be thinking, Rohit, you have used highlight, but what if you would have used isVisible? In that case, would the output be the same? Let me show you what I mean. For example, I'm just going to identify the cell user 1, and in reference to it, using the relational API, I'm going to now access delete, right? Now watch it, I will use isVisible, and inside this, I'm just going to add this element. In which case, if I execute it, you can notice it evaluates and tells me true. Yes, near the cell user 1, there is a delete which is visible. Now, if in case I were to replace this 1 with 2 and execute it, you can see in this case it is telling true, but tell me near user 2, is there a link called as delete? No. But that is why near is failing you, because the delete above user 2 is 100% still near user 2 only, which means even isVisible is not giving you the right outcome. Hence, that is why I said near is not going to work out in this scenario, and we have to use the other relational API of rightOf, in which case if I execute, clearly you can see false. So, if in case you are thinking in the perspective of isVisible, I hope this example clarified that to you. So, I hope you're able to understand a practical application of rightOf. Alright, so this is great. I hope everybody understood rightOf. But sometimes even rightOf is not going to give us the exact output that is required. To give you an example of that, what I'm going to do is, I have another dummy table here for your reference. As you can see, this is a table in which there are columns ID, name, last name, email, phone number, hiring date, job ID, etc. Now let us assume I need to write a script which is going to be able to identify the email of a given employee. Now, how are we going to do this? Let us take the example of this E201, employee 201. Now, to the right of employee 201 is where the email is present. So, please understand, yes, email is to the right of it, but the problem is, even if I were to give a name, also it will work. Even if I were to give the last name, also it will work. If I were to give a phone number, also it will work, because all of this is to the right of the employee ID E202. Which means I'm not able to write a script which is exactly going to identify email. So how do you do it? So let me just bring your focus back here. 100% the email is to the right of E201, but so is first name, so is last name. So I need to add an additional condition, and here I would tell, hey listen, please find an email which is to the right of E201, but not only that, which is under this cell called as email, which is under this element called as email. If it is also under email, then it is the right element. Would you agree with me? So how can we do that? Please try to understand. I will say highlight this cell, which is my email cell, which is to the right of the cell ID E201. But not only that, please try to understand what is also important is comma. That this is underscore under, which is another relational API. Under what? Under what, if you ask me? It is under a cell. Which cell is this, if you ask me? The name of this cell obviously is email. I hope you will understand, and that is how you will identify. Even if you were to hover over email, it will tell cell email like this. So that is how you identify email, and that is what I have written here, underscore cell email. Am I clear till here? So now please read this. Highlight the cell ashutosh.sharma@gmail.com, which is to the right of the cell E201 and which is also under the cell email. I hope you will understand. Now, if in case I were to execute it, clearly you can see it will highlight. So, I hope all of you understood a practical application of this. Also, let us assume that, for example, you didn't even know what is the mail address. For example, you didn't know that the mail address is ashutosh.sharma@gmail.com. But what you know is, you know that the employee's ID is 201, and in that particular row under this column called as email, you want the email address. So which means if you don't know the email, you can't put a value here. Hence, one more alternative approach is, if you don't know the value of the email, just put a 0 here.
You don't have to give any value. Even then, if in case I were to execute, clearly one can notice it is highlighting ashutosh.sharma. So in the case where you do not know the exact email you want to match for, but whatever email is there in according to the code or the script we have written, then this is a really good approach that you can be using. Now, the opposite of right-off is left-off. The opposite of under is above. And I'm sure you guys will be able to come up with scenarios where you can write left-off related APIs and also above related APIs, right? So I hope all of you understood this and it was informative, but please understand, only if you go and play around with this tool called as Sahi Pro will your understanding deepen. I will catch you in the next topic. Take care.